All right, my screen is being shared.
Yes.
We didn't test the audio prior, so we shall hope that this works. If not, we can go in and fix that setting.
It doesn't, it's just it's the blue circle with the triangle in it.
Yeah.
It's this percent.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll check the audio once we get to a video. But again, thank you all so much for having me. I see some familiar faces from last time. So yay, thank you for coming back. I hope you enjoyed our history lesson on jazz. And today we're going to dive into modern dance. There's so much to get to with modern dance. So I'm going to do my best to get to as much as I can. Of course, we won't cover everything. We won't watch videos of everything, but I hope that the selected videos that I've chosen are ones that are of interest to you all.
Yeah.
Please feel free to ask questions, or we can save questions for the end if we'd like, just to kind of get through. But of course, if there's lingering things that you just have to get off your mind, please feel free to let me know. So modern dance is happening at the same time as jazz is happening, really, when we talk about the sort of pioneers of modern dance. But I'll kind of start at the beginning, and we'll talk about the forerunners of modern dance and the individuals that started doing things a little bit differently. And then we'll dive into the pioneers of modern dance, the next generation of modern dance. And then if we have time, hopefully we do, we'll talk about a little bit about postmodern dance. As I love just kind of diving into postmodern dance, and kind of gets really radical and interesting, I think. Or am I not starting from my beginning? Here we go.
Yeah, here we go.
All right, so I can't really dive into modern dance without just briefly mentioning ballet. I won't dive into the history of ballet because I'm going to save that for my colleague Lucila on the 14th. But modern dancers are really considered to be the rebels of ballet. So in order to know what they were rebelling against, we kind of have to talk just a little bit about ballet. Of course, I have this image here, which is sort of what we picture, I think, when we think about ballet: the point shoes, the tutus, kind of the poise and the elegance and the structure of the ballet here. But ballet, when we talk about concert dance, is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, forms of concert dance that we know of. It dates all the way back to the 15th century. We had Catherine de' Medici, who brought her ballet masters from Italy to France when she married the King of France. So the big debate about, is ballet Italian? Is it French? Is it Russian? It's all of those things, but it was really Catherine de' Medici who brought the ballet masters over to France, where we get ballet and all the vocabulary being from the French language. So the first court ballet that we know of is done in 1581. And we have a little bit of a timeline that I made at the bottom for you, just to kind of see the long extended history of ballet before we dive into what we consider to be modern dance. So at the beginning, we had court ballets. So these are going to be ballets that were done by and for members of the nobility only. These are also going to be ballet dances that are done only by men. So women were not allowed to perform in the ballet in the 15th century, 16th century. From this also going to be a time where ballet isn't performed on a stage, but really performed in sort of that ballroom, what they called the round sort of setting. So different kind of idea than where we see ballet today. You're also going to see a lot of really simple posing. The ballet is happening really slowly. Lots of elaborate sort of costumes as the nobility wore. From there, we get the Baroque era, right? The kind of opera style dancing, again, big extravagant costumes. This leads us to 19th century, where we get the Romantic era, which is going to be also the Romantic era of ballet. So this is going to be the long tutu that extends past the knees. These are going to be dances that have to do with nature and romance and violence, a lot of mythical characters at this time. This is going to lead us into classical ballet, which is where we get the shortened tutu. This image here from Swan Lake, right? That very classical image, the point shoes. And then it leads us into neoclassical ballet with George Balanchine, where he sort of stripped away the costumes and the scenery and the themes and storylines and created sort of plotless ballets. So the early modern dancers really wanted to experiment and kind of go a bit away from these restrictions of the ballet. They felt, well, I don't want to wear these sort of costumes. I don't want to dance about these ideas. I don't want to wear the point shoes. They were kind of rejecting all of the ideas of the ballet and wanting to find a new way to move. And so the term modern dance, it's relatively, because it's a relatively new form when you compare it to ballet that we had in 15th century. We don't get modern dance until the 1800s, really the early 1900s, but some of the forerunners were creating some new ways of moving starting in the 1800s. So we have Louis Fuller, who started using different lighting techniques in her work, and I'll show you a little example of that. But really just movement with a big white fabric and projections of light. Isadora Duncan is considered to be the mother of modern dancing. She started finding more natural ways of moving, so skipping and hopping and running and trying to free the body rather than kind of give it that structure and sort of that rigidness that you see in the ballet. She also danced barefoot. Then we get in German Expressionism or German modern dance, you had Rudolf Laban, who created a system for notating dance. You had Mary Wigman, who started to create dances that were happening on the floor, dancing to percussion. Again, these were ideas that went very far out from what we saw in the ballet. And then here in America, we had Dennis Shawn with Ruth St. Denis and Ted Shawn, who started being influenced by other cultures and fusing dances from other cultures, particularly the Asian countries, into modern dance techniques. So I'll show you some video examples of this so you kind of get a sense for what the forerunners were doing.
Mhm.
So here's Louis Fuller. So you see the fabric, how it's changing colors. Again, this is done just via
Mhm.
the projection of light. So not a whole lot of movement and dancing. She's really pretty stationary, but really trying to create a different sort of visual at the time. So this is going to be sort of the early days of modern dancing. Okay, next up we have Isadora Duncan. Do you hear the audio from that?
Yes.
You do? Okay, great.
I'm not getting the audio. How do I get the audio?
Want me to help you?
Me either, I don't have it.
Not getting the audio either.
It's gone.
Did someone say they're not getting the audio?
No,
No audio?
No
No.
audio.
Audio.
Okay. That's okay. Here we go. Tell me if you get the audio.
Yes.
So that was Isadora Duncan. Again, we see kind of the light sort of steps as she's kind of moving, a bit childlike, hopping and skipping, things that are considered to be more natural than the things that we would have seen in the ballet, although Duncan was a trained ballet dancer as well. And then here's an example of Mary Wigman, who comes from German Expressionism. This is a dance called Witch Dance, perfect for Halloween week.
yep.
So here in America, we weren't quite ready for this, as most of the modern dancing is happening over in Europe, where they seem to be more open-minded. So Isadora Duncan was an American dancer, but she was dancing over in Europe, just like Louis Fuller was. Wigman, who's from Germany. So all of these things are happening over in Europe before we ever see modern dance happening here. But you can see how this is pretty extreme coming from that image that I showed you of the ballet, right? So 1800s, early 1900s, when audiences were used to seeing things like Swan Lake or Giselle or La Sophie, coming into something like this, it was quite extreme. So they're considered, again, to be the sort of rebels of the ballet and wanting to do everything entirely differently, just like Mary Wigman did, which was a dance entirely on the floor. Also one of the first modern dance choreographers to use percussion as the sound for her work. I want to just take a moment here to show you this. If you're looking at this thinking like, what is this? It looks like another language because it sort of is. But Rudolf von Laban, also over in Germany, created a system for notating dance at this time called Laban notation. This is an example of what it looks like here. It's sort of like music where it is written in measures. So you can read this from bottom to top, left to right. And this is the way that at the time the dancers could notate each of the steps. And this is really significant because this is how we know of a lot of the ballets that are reconstructed today were done so using this system, using lava notation. So a lot of the ballets and modern dances, we know if we don't have video recordings of them, we have this notation system. Now this sheet right here would probably be just, you know, maybe 30 seconds of a dance. If you were going to do a full length ballet, you would probably have a huge binder full of this, but this will tell you what direction the dancers are traveling in, what movement, what body position, what body part, where the weight of the dancer is, what directional changes are happening. And again, this is created by Rudolf von Laban, who is considered to be the father of modern dance. So a little brief moment of history, because it is going to be really significant to the creation of American modern dance. So we have the fall of German Expressionism. This is around the time of World War II. All of the writings and teachings of Mary Wigman and of Laban were completely eliminated because it didn't align with the Nazi cultural policies. So their influence essentially evaporated. Their books, their schools, their notation system declared anti-German. So a lot of these choreographers either fled or stopped creating dance altogether. This is also the same time where the Olympic Games in 1936 are happening over in Germany. So here in America, and this is going to be right after Denachon, that's creating some of these cultural modern dance forms. And again, the decade following, Germans went back to sort of the traditional ways of dancing, and it was really the fall of German Expressionism that led to the rise of American modern dance, because at this point, Americans are going to start to claim modern dance as their own sort of invention, and then we get the pioneers that are going to start to codify the technique. So the forerunners started to do things and move in a way that was a bit differently. And then we have the pioneers of American modern dance that are going to start to give structure and codify the form and create different techniques and styles that we consider to be modern dance. So at this point, these major figures, they didn't just want to create different ways of moving like the forerunners did. They also wanted to create different themes to dance about. Because if we think about the ballet, you think about 1800s, early 1900s, from classical to romantic ballet, all of the themes and stories are about fairy tales and fables, mythical creatures, and, you know, these beautiful nature settings and witches and fairies and all of these things that in the early 1900s, people just couldn't really relate to it anymore. We had times of war, we had the Great Depression, and so people were kind of going away from these ideas, and the dancers really wanted to express themselves in a different way. So yes, they wanted to move differently, but they also wanted different themes. They no longer wanted to dance about some of these fairy tales, and they wanted to make way for the human condition. They wanted to use their dance and use their platform to say something that could be said in movement that wasn't just this sort of fantasy world that had been created for so many years up until this point with the ballet. And modern dance was just the perfect way to express themselves and do that. So the big four that we'll talk about that are considered to be the founders of American modern dance are Martha Graham, Doris Humphrey, Charles Weidman, and Hanya Holm. Here they are, the big four. I have sort of a little quote for each of them because I think it kind of gives you a sense of who they are just to hear their sort of voice within them. So Martha Graham says, "Nobody cares if you can't dance well. Just get up and dance. Great dancers are not great because of their technique. They are great because of their passion." Martha Graham. And if you're familiar with Graham's work at all, lots of expression in it, lots of passion behind her movements, but also lots of technique, lots of technique. So she did create her own sort of style and complexity within modern dance. It wasn't just kind of moving around freely, but she did codify her own form. And if you take a modern dance that's in the Graham style or technique, it will look exactly the same. So the things that she's known for is the use of the cupped hands. So if you look at this picture, she has her hands sort of cupped, right? This is a bit different from the way that ballerinas will sort of elongate their fingers and place their hands, but this is very essential to her technique. And then there's also the use of breath that is important to her technique and style, because her style revolves around the idea of contracting and releasing through the center of the body. So if you think of sort of getting punched in the gut, right, and contracting your body and then releasing out of that, her technique, when you watch it, looks a bit like that. So the contract and the release. She did have her own school starting in 1927. It did start with the School of All Women. And then she expanded to having some men in her company. And thankfully she did that, because she does have a lot of famous students that came from her company, like Paul Taylor and Merce Cunningham and Eric Hawkins, just to name a few. The company is still around today. So even beyond Martha Graham, her company still exists in New York. I mentioned how in 1936, the Olympic Games were being held over in Germany. During the same time, Martha Graham is actually invited by Hitler to perform at the Olympic Games, and she declined to do so because she was not in alignment and agreement with what was happening over in Germany. And in response, instead, she created this dance. This is an excerpt from Chronicle called Steps in the Street that Graham choreographed in 1936. There's a little description here, but she was essentially trying to show the destruction that war causes and human suffering. And I'll play a clip of this video so you kind of see also her technique and style. But again, a lot of these modern dancers were really sort of focused and shifting away from the fairy tales and trying to kind of use their platform to say something, even if it pushes sort of social, political boundaries. I'm going to pause it right there. So of course you'll notice her technique, the cupped hands, the contraction, the release, but something that would also stand out to you if you are familiar with ballet is that there's no scenery in this. There's no background. The costumes are also quite muted, right? Just the black sort of long dress. In the ballet, you would see lots of characters. You would see tutus. You would see more extravagant costumes. You would see a scenery, you would see a background, you would see a more sort of concrete storyline versus the way that Martha Graham interpreted this dance, a bit more abstract, right, in her technique. Here are just some of her famous works. Lamentation is a big one, which is pictured here, so I wanted to show an image of this with the fabric. Steps in the Street is the one that I just showed you that excerpt of. And Night Journey is another very famous work that she did in 1947. And then I have some collaborations that she did with Louis Horst at the bottom from Primitive Mysteries in 1931. And then she continued to collaborate with Louis Horst from there. So here's a quote from another pioneer, Doris Humphrey. She says, "The dancer believes that his art has something to say which cannot be expressed in words or in any other way than by dancing." Doris Humphrey. Now, together with Charles Weidman, Doris Humphrey established the Humphrey-Weidman School. The way that Martha Graham had contract and release, Humphrey Weidman had fall and recovery. So fall and recovery really uses gravity as the impulse for movement. So if you kind of see this photo here, and you can see that Humphrey is a bit off balance, that is kind of the point of the style. So they kind of fall in and out of balance. They really use gravity to propel their movement. So this idea of actually falling and giving into gravity, and then the recovery, right? Finding that balance again. Of course, like I said, I won't be showing videos of everything just because we won't have enough time, but I do have an image here of an important work by Humphrey. It's called Water Study from 1928. In this work, the dancers, there is no music, and the dancers just use their own breathing to propel their movements. And that is how they have their sense of time. So they just listen to each other breathe, and they create this rippling effect throughout their body to create these wave-like formations that rolls from one body to the other to create the water. Here's a quote by her partner, Charles Weidman. He says that art demands that we be part of life and merge with it. Art and life are as indivisible an entity as the artist and his audience. Charles Weidman. So Charles Weidman also wanted to create dances with significance and meaning. One piece of work that he did was called Lynchtown in 1935. This is a dance that depicted sort of the behavior of the mob mentality and the crowd present during a lynching. Here is a quote that I have from the New York Times that describes this work. And I'll zoom in a bit. Oh, not zooming out. Let's zoom in a bit. I know that the text can be sort of small if you're looking at it from your screen. But here's an image from the work Lynchtown. It says, Lynchtown was filled with accusatory gestures, grotesque hoppings and stampings, and fierce pursuits. The twisted minds of bigots were symbolized by twisted bodies. Dancers doubled up with rage, and when the lynch mob finally dragged in its victim, they gathered about its body as if they were vultures. So that comes from the New York Times. Next up, we have Hanya Holm. Hanya Holm, unlike the other three who came from the Denishan School here in America, Hanya Holm actually studied in Germany with Mary Wigman. Her quote says, dances without purpose have false starts and stops. Hanya Holm. So it was in 1931 that Hanya Holm established the Wigman School. So this is how we still have some of the teachings from Mary Wigman and Laban as well. We know that that sort of evaporated over in Germany, but students of theirs like Mary Wigman, like Hanya Holm, developed the Wigman School to continue some of these teachings. She also created something called absolute dance, which is a technique without the use of pantomime or dramatic overtones. If you're familiar with the ballet, again, pantomime, literal gestures are a big part of the ballet as they're trying to tell a story and they have character. So we see lots of pantomime. But even in modern dance, when we see some works of Martha Graham, there's also some pantomimes. There's also some drama that we see with her work as well. And so once we get to Hanya Holm and her technique and style, she kind of wanted to strip the dance away from that a bit to just create, again, what she calls to be absolute dance.
Oh, I have to describe the studio itself, that when you came in the side door, that you first came to the dressing rooms, which were kind of dank because they were down in a basement kind of thing. But when you went into the studio itself, it was like going into a cathedral, where Hanya would come in and she would surround herself with her tom-toms and her gongs, and she would just start a rhythm. And she would say, start across the floor, Louise, and Louise would start doing something, and then she'd say, Mary, you join Louise. So these classes that went on for 2 hours with Hanya drumming away and calling out directions to everybody were so fabulous that we would just shriek at the end. You know, there was nothing you could do except... And then this phenomenon began to occur where people who were in ballet theater somehow heard about Hanya, Annabelle Lyon, Bambi Lynn, Ray Harrison began to come to the studio. That was also the time that Glenn Tetley came to the studio. And I remember him coming into the studio in a sailor cap with these curls, saying, "I want to be a dancer. Do you think I could study here?" And Hanya and I looked at each other and said, "We are very happy to have you study at the Hanya Home Studio."
I think the absolute center of Hanya's genius as a teacher is that she wanted you to think. She wanted you to explore. She wanted you to discover. After the technique class, we had a theory class, and with a theory class, you could take one single element. As we did. When I tell dancers today that sometimes we turned for 2 hours, they don't believe it. But you don't feel what turning is until you have gotten to the point of fatigue, where you start to release into something, and suddenly it's exhilarating. You begin to understand. We used to do arm swings for 2 hours, the same arm swing, and it's only when the body suddenly becomes tired enough that it releases and does the movement properly and beautifully. That was a marvelous and I think unique experience, that there was time to talk about these things philosophically.
That everybody speaks about space. What do we know? It's there and very functional, but it is not to be said that it is so cut and dry that I can put it in a book and say the book will tell you. It's a thing which has to be experienced.
There was this feeling of a university of dance, which I think is really a wonderful concept, but in a professional setting, not in a university setting, in a professional New York setting, that we were also taught notation and music and some history of dance.
Hanya's University of Dance became a center for the study of Labo notation, the leading system for recording movement. While the dance world applauded, President Roosevelt's War Department had to be convinced that Mr. Laban's symbols did not contain secret codes.
I find that to be so fascinating as well. Of course, she was continuing these teachings of Labo notation, but the War Department was like, what is this? They didn't understand it. They didn't know what these symbols meant, and they started to investigate further because they weren't, of course, these teachings come from Germany, so they weren't exactly sure what it was that was being taught. And I tell my students all the time, today we can pick up our cell phone and just record a dance and have it with us forever and ever. But, you know, at this time we use notation, right? They were actually writing symbols to recreate dances, and also using it to analyze shapes and space, and really kind of get this whole, wasn't just movement, but really kind of analyzing how they were doing what they were doing. So it's really all just sort of fascinating. So, of course, we're talking about the early 1900s here. We have the Great Depression, and a lot of these modern dance choreographers, they really identified with people that were oppressed and unemployed. So they did things like perform at rallies and strikers' benefits, but they also did something that was really important and significant, and that's provide affordable dance training to working class people. Of course, that wasn't necessarily the case with something like ballet. But in modern dance, it really kind of created a space for individuals. They also had some support from the government at this time, because they wanted people to have an outlet. They wanted people to turn to dance to express themselves. And modern dance sort of paved the way for that, because anyone or working class individuals could have affordable dance classes at a time where, you know, if you didn't have money to eat, you weren't going to spend money to train and take dance classes. They also protested a lot of injustices that were happening in this time period, often using dance as a way to do that. We saw Charles Weidman's Lynchtown, a photograph from that work. We saw Martha Graham's Steps in the Street, where she also used her platform to say something. Pictured here is Anna Sokolow's rooms that shows sort of what poverty looked like during this time. So really, again, it was about the human condition. It was about trying to give people a voice and trying to give people an outlet. This is going to lead us into the next generation of modern dancers. There again are so many, but here are three of the greats. We have Catherine Dunham, Pearl Primus, and of course, the legendary Alvin Ailey. Here's a quote from Catherine Dunham. She says, "Go within every day and find the inner strength so that the world will not blow your candle out." Catherine Dunham. Catherine Dunham is really significant to modern dance, also to jazz as well. She fused different styles together in her technique of modern dance. So it combined ballet, it combined elements of jazz, and it also combined elements of the Caribbean. She was an anthropologist. She was a researcher. She was a scholar. She was a woman of color, and she was a professor. Again, in early 1900s, where it was really difficult to be all of those things, she was. So she is definitely a huge inspiration, and she broke a lot of barriers. She was a star in a lot of different films. She had her company, of course, that gave a lot of performances, but with that, she also faced a lot of hardships. There was a story of her once getting, she was out somewhere arrested, and she didn't say who she was because she was with other individuals, and she wanted to see what it was like for people of color at the time, in jail, what they experienced. So rather than saying who she was, she stayed, and instead of giving a performance, she spent the night in jail just to experience those hardships. There was another instance where she gave a performance, got a standing ovation. The audience wanted an encore. And instead of giving them an encore, she said that that would be her last performance until people like her could perform amongst people like them. Right. So again, during a time of segregation, during times where a lot of African-American performers were facing hardships, Catherine Dunham was using her voice to try and stand up against these injustices at the time. Here's another figure, Pearl Primus. She created a work called Strange Fruit that I will show you a clip from.
Artists have always commented on social and political issues in their work. Nowhere is that more evident than in Strange Fruit by the powerful Pearl Primus. Set to the words of Lewis Allen's poem of the same title, the solo performer anguishes over a lynching.
Southern trees bear a strange fruit. Blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. Strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South. the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth. Scent of magnolias, sweet and fresh. At the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here is a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rains to gather, for the winds to suck, for the sun to rot, for the tree to drop. Here is a strange and bitter crop.
So Strange Fruit done and choreographed in the 40s, obviously to a very famous poem. And what we see in this is also something that we hadn't seen before, which is dance done to spoken word, right? So again, before this, when you're thinking of things of the ballet, you often associate the music, but here we see spoken word. We also see dance that's done in moments of silence. And I think that's really powerful and significant because you also kind of notice the subtlety of the dancers. You notice her gestures, you hear her breathing, right? You see just not only see what she's doing, but you also hear her body, her fatigue. You notice her expression, right? So some things, again, that were done quite differently. And then we have Alvin Ailey, who's probably the most famous of the modern dancers. His company is known all around the world. And really what he did that was significant and what he was really proud of was that he wanted to create a multiracial company. He didn't want dancers to be excluded because of race. He wanted to hire dancers based off of talent alone. He created a lot of famous works. I'm sure one that a lot of you might be familiar with. It's called Revelations. I know that there were some Ailey fans in the room during my last presentation, so I thought I'd bring you a little bit of Ailey today. So we'll watch this and then we can talk about it. So this work has really, what I think amazes me about this work is that it was created in 1960 and audiences today still love it. I, you know, teach college students, and this is the work that they have the most to say about, that they're most excited to see. And of course, it's still being performed today. So Alvin Ailey, their company will close every show with Revelation still today. And it's incredible that a work that was created in 1960, today in 2024, audiences still love it, still relate to it, still gravitate towards it. Alvin Ailey's unique style of modern dance fuses together, of course, elements from ballet, from jazz, from African dance, and then his own version of modern dance. So it's a really exciting sort of dance form to watch. So in this piece, Revelations, it really tells the story of African American faith and tenacity from slavery to freedom, and it is set to spirituals and blues music. If you watch the full production, of course, I kind of jumped ahead, but in order so you can kind of see, but you can sort of notice this. If you look at this image, from the very beginning of the work, it's very dimly lit. The costumes are very muted, right? And then as you keep watching, you sort of see that trajectory sort of change. We see, right, the white fabric that it comes out. And then towards the end, we really see this big celebration with the sun yellow costumes, right? So you kind of, again, see that progression and evolution. Alvin Ailey was a really significant figure within modern dance, did change modern dance again by creating his own unique style. But really all of these artists in modern dance really paved the way for performers overall. When we think about ballet, which of course was one of the early forms of concert dance, it was still sort of exclusive. And even in, early 1900s, not everyone could perform in the ballets. So modern dance really paved the way for anyone that wanted to participate in dance. It was really extended, beyond race, beyond gender, beyond these ideas of what the ballet needed to be or what dance needed to look like at the time, and really allowed for some experimentation to happen, really allowed for expression to happen, and really allowed for humans to connect with one another by moving their bodies in a way that felt more free. And in addition, creating stories that were relevant and that had meaning and that shared a significant political or social message in the best way that they knew how, and that's through dance. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes, I do.
Oh, okay, great.
No, I spoke about it. I saw an Alvin Ailey performance at the Whitney a few weeks ago, and I was very dismayed and disappointed. It wasn't the usual form that I'm accustomed to seeing Alvin Ailey's dancers perform. I said, what is going on here? I could not believe it. And I know that you're not supposed to have prejudice towards anybody. Heavy people can be very light-footed, but there was a gentleman with a beer belly that was dancing, and I really couldn't encompass him with the group personally. It was almost like they carried out boxes or a little suitcase, and they sat around facing each other as if they were in a flea market ready to sell stuff. And the only dance they had is like you see in Revelations. A few of them, maybe 4 or 6, would kind of jump a little bit to the right and a little bit to the left. But I was so dismayed. Even the music they used was not throughout the whole piece. It was like melodic and then very, very strong and sharp, and then again melodic. I was totally disappointed. And you had a word for that.
Yeah,
dancing.
Yeah, postmodern. And which I have a whole other presentation that I had set up and ready, but I didn't think we were gonna have time to get to because I know this is only an hour. I would love, maybe in the future I can do a whole postmodern dance.
I would love it.
History. That was, if I had time, is what I was gonna dive into, but there's just not enough time.
Okay.
But from
Thank
this
you.
point, so in 60s, 50s, 60s, especially 70s, dance starts to get really experimental and postmodern. And what I mean by that is that the same way that the modern dancers rebelled against ballet, the postmodern dancers rebelled against modern and made pedestrian movement, danced in sneakers, stripped it from storyline, stripped it from all the things that make dance exciting, and really kind of made a statement with what they were trying to do. Instead of asking like, what is dance? They were asking what isn't. So they were testing and pushing those boundaries. So things that are very pedestrian, I think it sounds like what you described, pushing boxes or sitting, standing, minimal movement, not really acknowledging the audience, not overly exciting music. All of those were really intentional choices that were done by postmodern dancers, particularly in the 70s when they were really experimenting. So perhaps there's an influence there. Of course, with Ailey's company, like any company, there's going to be different directors that could take over, different choreographers that might be choreographing. Obviously, Ailey's no longer around. So, you know, that wasn't an Ailey work, I assume.
No.
So, you know, I don't know who choreographed that particular dance.
I didn't get his name. But the
It
woman
would be
sitting
interesting
next to
to
me
look it
was her
up.
friend, and he's my friend, the choreographer, and this should be great. But I did meet a couple at the bus stop, and they loved it. It was so avant-garde.
Avant-garde, yeah.
Folks, yeah.
Avant-garde perfectly defines and describes postmodern dance.
Mhm.
And you know, it's not for everyone. I think the beautiful thing about dance is that we can all be watching the same things, even things I showed today, and some people will love it and some people will not, right? We all sort of gravitate towards different things. So I think just kind of finding your own personal aesthetic will kind of lean you into the things that you enjoy watching.
Sabrina, we have another hand raised by Susan Matus.
Hi, Susan.
Susan, unmute.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
Two questions. I don't know what happened. I just lost it. In the early 20th century, where you showed, I guess it was Martha Graham in the very beginning, where you had the founders, so to speak, of the movement. Were they doing choreographed things, or were they totally freeform?
Choreographed. So the modern dancers, particularly Martha Graham, is going to be all choreography. When we get to more so the postmodern dancers, that's going to be 50s, 60s is the early postmodern dancers, but 70s, then you're going to see more sort of improvisation.
Okay, so how the heck is it written down? How is it? You said that dance began in the 15th century. Was it written down then, or was it just like the music, where that was before they started writing down music?
So dance would have existed even before this point. Ballet would have existed 15th century. This is the earliest form that we know of that is recorded, right? So written, not through Laba notation, but just in like written history that we know of.
Is that the way it was done? You know, even the formal ballets, it was done by writing down a description of how to move. In other words,
you mean like 15th century?
Even 19th century or 18th century.
Yeah, so once we get Laba notation, it would have been notated with not every ballet, but it would have been recorded using the symbols that can translate actual specific movements. Before that point, we sort of have an idea of what it looked like. So thinking of like Louis the 14th, who performed in the ballets, would have been doing like simple poses, standing in the round. We know it would have been performed by men. You know, the ballet would have taken hours. Exactly what was being done. You know, there's also paintings at that point. But once we get sort of like early 1900s, say 1800s, we're going to start to see that notation. So that's going to be more specific. That's going to tell us specifically the choreography that we can actually recreate step by step by step with that notation system.
When was that? I'm sorry. When was that?
In the early 1900s, Laba notation.
Okay. Okay. All right. So you've answered my question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sabrina,
Yes.
Are there any other questions before we thank Sabrina? Well, it was a wonderful follow-up. I know I learned things I never knew before about especially about the notation. And I of course love Revelations, and what a wonderful way to end this session.
I thought so. It's a nice kind of way to conclude. I'd also love to just say and invite everyone that's on here tonight. Broward College, we have a performance November 22nd and 23rd. It is a free show. We have some really beautiful dancing. We're going to have some dances that are going to be jazz, some that are modern dance, some that are more contemporary. So I think there's like a little bit for everyone, and it is a free show. So I invite you all to come and enjoy. We have a really beautiful, beautiful theater. And like I said, really beautiful dancing. I will share the flyer, and then hopefully you can share it.
Yes, yes. If you send me the
Everyone.
flyer, I'll be happy to share it with everybody.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Well, Sabrina, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for this wonderful
Thank
presentation.
you all.
And we look forward to seeing on the 14th, Lucilla Godoy de Renzo.
Yes, Lorenzo. Yes,
Renzo?
she's incredible too. I think you all love her. She's a
Yes.
colleague of mine.
And she's going to talk about the evolution of ballet. So get ready for that. And again, Sabrina, we hope to see you again.
I
And,
hope so
Yes.
too.
and
Thank you.
in the meantime, happy Halloween to everybody. Have
Yes.
a good week and dance your way through life. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.